So I mentioned to the two of you, Seth and Chris, I'm a senior pastor in Hamden and a part of an organization called Bridges of Hope, and we have started to talk about discussions around racial reconciliation. So can the two of you talk specifically about what pastors and churches can do to combat racism today?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to do is to kind of make sure you begin by centering the why. Like, why does this even need to be done, right? Not only by acknowledging the kind of historical generational trauma of racism in our country, but from a theological perspective, recognizing that the greatest commandment within our tradition is to love God and love neighbor as we love ourselves. And this ability to love our neighbor, right, this is a part of our call to do anti-racism work, right? And to love our neighbor as ourselves, meaning that from a privileged perspective, you say, okay, how can I love them, again, as we've been expressing through our definition of joy, in their concrete reality? That's the theological charge. I think practically, the first thing clergy, I would recommend they do is begin by doing their own beginning work with regards to discovering the ways in which race and racialization influences them. And this includes clergy of color, right? Again, I'm a pastor, and I would say without the kind of skill set that I've been able to build by reading books, attending lectures, I've been able to discover, again, how racist ideologies are embedded in me. And how they operate within the world. I think not just assuming that because I'm a person of color, I know I have a certain experiential knowledge that's above white people, but there's still ways in which I can begin to learn more. And so that's a fundamental first point, in addition to having a theological kind of framework. And then begin by, I would suggest, again, I'm kind of partial to this because I'm an academic and I'm a theologian, like this needs to be something that's embedded in thinking about it from a Christian education and formation perspective. It can be complemented by like sermons, but it needs to be conversational. By saying like this is, create a study. We're saying, let's read Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited. Let's talk about Jesus from the perspective, right, of as Jesus as a person whose back is against the wall, as Thurman wrote. Jesus created and fashioned from the perspective of black people. And let's unpack what this actually means and how this reshapes how we even think about how we see Jesus, right? And so I think that's the kind of practical kind of steps I would take to begin with, and I think those are particularly important, again, for all clergy, but I would say specifically, black clergy can do some of those things as well.
And I think for white clergy especially, and interested lay people as well, we come to the table saying, yeah, we recognize race is a problem, but it's a problem out there. It's not a problem in me. It's not a problem in my church. And so dispensing with that assumption and saying, how might we see racism in our church? How might it be racist? And interacting with people of color who are willing to engage you around that and to share some of their experiences, and then to take those experiences as gospel, basically, as gospel truth. Like, with the knowledge of this experience, how does that change my reality? How does it change how I need to interact? Because out of that, you come to realize that theologically, I'm not in line with what I say I'm doing. What I'm actually doing is not the same as what I preach. And aligning those is fundamentally important.
There's a certain kind of humility, I think, that all clergy have to have, but I would say especially white cleargy, to where they ought to begin, just as I said, by doing their own work. They have to begin to model this, as you well know, as a pastor. You have to model the spirituality you want your congregation to have. And if you want them to think and engage in anti-racist work, then you need to be doing it first and plumbing their own depths so that you can speak to them in your authentic reality. And you can not come to them as some sage on the stage expert, but like, yeah, I have realized and learned how I have been perpetuating these things. And I had to ask God to help change me. And it creates a kind of space where people can allow themselves to be vulnerable, you know, and realize that this is the church is a space for discipleship and transformation. It's not this space that's supposed to come in just to make us feel good, you know. And I think beginning with that acknowledgement of vulnerability and humility is fundamental, I think, for clergy, because we have a responsibility, like a biblical charge, you know, to be those kinds of leaders above reproach. And I believe we have to take that seriously, and that we are held accountable for that.
Yeah. I think so. If we really are all created in the image of God, what does the image of blackness look like as part of the image of God? Right? Truly, how is that part of the image of God? And I don't think we can answer that yet, many white clergy. So.